According to research from Phoenix Insight, the UK is less than 2 decades away from a pension crisis. What can people do to ensure that they're not the people that might be hit by a pension crisis?
So we've kind of transitioned away from a much more guaranteed world to a world where all the risk is now on the individual rather than on the government and on the companies, the employers. And we've done that without actually telling anybody. So I'd say it's an education crisis, but it's going to be manifested in a financial pension crisis, potentially.
I wish I put money in my pension early. And why is it important for people to put money in as early as possible?
Anything you can do today, which is more than you're doing already, is going to improve your future financial position. And future you will thank you profusely if they're better off in the future because of a decision you made now.
Definitely.
There's no better and more tax efficient way to build wealth than in a pension. It's never been easier to do that. Don't sweat the detail. Just open a pension, start paying into it. The biggest issue that most people have is that most people join their workplace pension and there is always a default fund inside it. The default fund won't do the job because it will be too steady. The way you beat inflation is to invest in the great companies of the world. I'm a big believer in living for today. It's a fine balance. We got to do both, right? You've got to enjoy today and save for tomorrow.
You're not defined by where you come from.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big message that I always want to tell people. Like
you have to be able to be uncomfortable. Like be comfortable with being uncomfortable.
When you grow up in ends, you don't realize it when you're confident, but you have an audacity to do things that ordinarily most people wouldn't be willing to do.
Welcome back to another episode of podcast. I'm your host, Atto. We have a special guest in the building. We have Pete Matthew, who's a 27-year veteran, chartered financial planner, and a CEO of Jackson in Penance, Cornwall, where he and his team help clients organize and optimize their finances so they can achieve their goals. 15 years ago, he created Meaningful Money, where he's developed over 600 videos and 550 podcast episodes, helping countless people understand how money works and how to make it work for them. His second book, The Meaningful Money Retirement Guide, is coming out in May 2025 and will teach people how to plan and execute a perfect retirement. Pete, how are you doing today?
I'm really good, Atto. Thank you for that, man. It's great to be here. I'm excited to chat to you.
I'm very excited about this conversation. I think it's going to be so interesting. We're going to be able to leverage your vast experience in not just the podcasting world, but also, in terms of personal finances and financial planning.
People say I've got vast experience. You're just telling me I'm old.
So that's a nice way for me to say
I'll take it.
So how are you doing today? How's your day been?
I'm good, man. I've come up on the train. So I live in Penzance, which is the very far west of Cornwall. So it's 10 miles from Land's End. So the fast train to London is 5 hours. Right. So I've done a lot of work on the train, and then I've just been to see a company that we work with a lot with our clients. And now I'm here to see you, and I'm feeling good. And I'm looking forward because I'm going out to a steak dinner after this.
Nice,
so I'm looking forward to that.
Enjoy the steak dinner in London. So obviously I described, I feel like a little part of you, but who would you say Pete is?
First and foremost, man, I'm a husband and a dad. So I've been married to Jo for 27 years. I've got two beautiful girls, 25 and 22 nearly, Ellie and Kate, and a couple of dogs as well. Even the dogs are girls, right? I'm surrounded by women in my house, which is great. So they're obviously the joy and the priority, but I guess I love people, right? And entirely by accident, I ended up in the personal finance world, and I quickly came to realize that money is just really dull and uninteresting, but of course we all need to understand it. We all need to have some of it, and we don't teach kids anything really about money in school. And so I consider it my life's work to sort of do my bit to fill the gap, really, and to just educate this as many people as possible about how money works, because at its root it's quite simple for the vast majority of people. If you're mega wealthy, or if you've got really complicated situation, then you're the outliers. But most of us, we just need to do a few things well and consistently, and we'll be okay. And that's kind of the mission. So that's what I'm all about. That's what gets me up in the morning. I
love that. And you know what? You're absolutely right in terms of that. We don't teach it in school, and it's fascinating. Although you've been in the industry for such a while, and the fact that even I'm even saying that it's not something we were taught. We're still not really taught in school. I don't know if there ever will be a change, but you can kind of see that reflected in some of the statistics. I've talked about on the podcast before, how many people have a stocks and shares ISA in the UK, which isn't
nowhere near enough.
Nowhere near enough, right? It's not, we don't even have 50%. We have a stocks and shares, which is absolutely crazy considering. I didn't realize, for some reason, I think I assumed that other countries in the world would have stocks and shares ISA. A lot of other places are, other places like here don't have anything similar. We don't even make use of that. So
no, we're very lucky, really. There's lots of things we could do in this country to improve our financial situation. But if you don't know about it, how would you ever do that?
Yeah, exactly.
So you got it all starts with knowledge and understanding, right? And then hopefully we find some money in our budget to do something to improve our situation. But it starts with education for sure.
Yeah. So obviously you've worked in, financial planning. You helped a lot of clients, right? Mm-hmm. Can you share with us one piece of money advice that, changed your life?
You primed me on this question. I'm very glad that you did, because I've been agonizing over it a little bit. I kind of want to go with two, but the one I'm going to go with is, it wasn't nobody said it to me, and you will have heard of it, but I read it in a book a long time ago, a book called The Automatic Millionaire by David Bach. And I don't even think it was original to him, but the piece of advice is to pay yourself first. Pay yourself first. So what that means is when you get your paycheck in and you're looking at what you're going to do with it. Okay, we have mortgage or rent, and we have to eat, and we have to clothe our kids or whatever. And the key to financial success is to pay yourself first. That means that even before you pay your bills, you put some money aside, which is yours, before you pay your bills. Now, people don't tend to think of it like that, because they think, well, I've got to pay the mortgage. Of course you have, right? But even if it's a tiny amount, the first thing you do is you either reduce your debt if you've got it, or you save it up for the future, right? And if you can automate that, then great things happen. It's a brilliant book, The Automatic Millionaire. Yeah. It's David Bach, the author, was a financial planner dealing with wealthy people. And he looked out of his window one day and saw this couple drive into his car park in a very ordinary beat-up car. And he knew they were the clients coming to see him. And he was like, I just want to get this meeting over with. They can't afford me. They're clearly not rich enough. Well, they were one of the richest clients that he'd ever dealt with. But they were just ordinary and assuming. And they didn't even have high-paying jobs. What they did was pay themselves first consistently. Always saved. Didn't carry bad debt, all that sort of stuff, but they weren't like mega high earners. So that message stuck with me, and I changed how I budget after that to always prioritize saving and debt reduction.
That's so interesting. I need to read that book. Wow,
it's a really easy read. You'd read it in 90 minutes. Wow. It's a dead easy read. I keep a stack of them in my office. Yeah.
And it just shows you the power, right? Because I think, again, a lot of people assume that for you to reach a certain status, right, or a certain amount of wealth, it's automatically, I need to have higher income, right? Yeah. They think that's what the equation is, rather than actually, like you say, actually try to manage what you have slowly but surely. And then obviously if your wage increases over time, then you're then able to put in more.
Capture some of that. Yeah,
exactly. A lot of people don't think of it like that. It's more incremental steps rather than thinking, okay, I need to be on a 150k salary, then I can, get to.
That's the danger. The danger is sort of almost postponing stuff until, I can do that when I get a pay rise, or, I can really start to take it seriously when, I get a promotion, or I get a gift from my parents because they've died or something. Do you know what I mean? I will do that when, whereas actually small steps often and done consistently month after month just can make a massive difference. Yeah. And it's thinking to do it, and then the ideal thing is that you automate that as much as possible. That's really where the magic. So it just happens. So if I, when I'm saving, it goes out the day after I get paid.
Is that in the form of like a direct?
Direct debit or standing order. Yeah, exactly right. Order, and it just happens. I never see that money, not really. And I've done that for years now. Well over 20 years, and it works. So anybody, and I've taught that to my kids as well. Pay yourself first. Everything else comes after. And it definitely works.
Yeah, you said it too. So I'm going to press you on the second one that you wanted to share.
So the other one, which was something that I finally figured out, because I think that good financial control is the root of everything. We don't have to talk about having a budget because it sounds really boring. It sounds really kind of restricting.
Yeah.
So a lot of people call it a spending plan, which makes sense. But ultimately, it's deciding where your money will go. And for years, I thought that I was budgeting because I could tell you to a penny where all my money had gone. But I was always looking backwards. So I would always look at what I had spent, categorize it, and I could give you lovely pie charts and spreadsheets and stuff showing where it all was. What I never did was say, right, next month, this is where I am going to put my money. I was always backward looking, whereas a proper budget is forward looking. You've got a plan. You need to tell your money what it's going to do instead of just tracking what it has done.
Yeah.
Right? It's about being intentional, forward thinking. So that's the other thing that came to mind when I read the question. Yeah. A budget is forward looking, not backward looking.
I like that because you're absolutely right. It's like thinking about not what you just done in the past. It's thinking about actually not just 1 month in the future, 2, 3, 4, and then starting to think years, because then you're then able to say to yourself, okay, this is where I can potentially get to in the next 5, 10 years, right?
Exactly.
That's so interesting. I've never really thought of it like that. If you're a traveler like me, aren't you tired of dealing with high roaming charges or hunting for Wi-Fi while traveling abroad? Fortunately, there's a way to get quality access to the internet at a low cost price. So whilst I was traveling abroad, I used Yesim that offers affordable and reliable internet plans in more than 200 countries worldwide, such as Turkey, UAE, United States, Egypt, France, and more. It was very easy to set up my eSIM, and just by following a few simple steps to activate my plan, I was online within minutes. I was really impressed with the speed and coverage. If you're tired of paying high roaming fees, check out Yesim. I've teamed up with them to share an exclusive trial plan to my audience, which you can essentially try out for free. By downloading the Yesim app, create an account, and applying my code SAVVY5, you'll get $5 credited to your account to use on various data plans. You can even use the $5 to grab the trial plan for free, which gives you 500 megs of data and is available in 54 countries. I've included a link in the description below. Take a look, give it a go, and enjoy smooth connectivity wherever you are. And talking about, small steps and thinking about the future, retirement, right?
Yeah, right.
So retirement, I think a lot of us don't like to think about, I think we like to think about retirement in a positive way. Oh, I want to retire early, 40, 50s, maybe earlier if you're fortunate enough to do that. And pensions, right? Again, it's one of these things that are often ignored. I would say for me, I didn't really pay much attention to my pension until probably mid to late 20s, which is kind of unfortunate because I feel like if I had paid a bit more attention, I might have contributed more, or I might have, maybe took advantage of like my employer's match, but I just didn't think I needed it. I was like,
that's normal, man.
Yeah.
Most people don't take attention early enough, but I understand that. You sort of getting used to earning and enjoying life. That's all good, right?
Yeah.
So that's normal.
Yeah. So it was a very interesting thing, but now obviously I've now understood the power of pensions, the power of using your employer match, the power of trying to put as much as you can so that you're able to obviously have a sizable pot when it comes to retirement. So for those that I think we all at high level understand what a pension is, but can you kind of explain it in layman terms what that actually is and how it kind of works?
Yeah. The problem with pensions is that people have lots of different views as to what they are. So they might think, the first thing they might think about is that the state pension, right? The one that we all get if we pay enough national insurance. When in our late 60s, we will get the state pension. And that is a social security benefit is what it is. So that's what many people will just think of. They may also think of the income that they will get when they retire, right? The money coming in every month. They may think about the pot of money, which is essentially what a pension is. I'll get to that in a minute. The pot of money that they save every month into, and maybe their employer puts money into as well. So it's both the pot, it's the income they get at the end, it's the state pension as well. There's a whole lot of bits to it. And but for most of us, particularly anybody younger than me, right, which is nearly 50. So for anybody younger than me, really a pension is just a savings pot. It's just like a box with money in it, okay? Like a bank account or like an ISA. It's just another, people like me, chartered financial planner, we would call it a tax wrapper, which is a horrible phrase. Yeah. But essentially, it's just a box with money in it that you can save into. And what you can put inside a pension, I'm sure we'll talk about, but it's that makes you wealthy going forward. That's that builds wealth for you.
Yeah.
But really, for most of us, this side of retirement is just a savings plan.
Okay. Interesting.
Somewhere to put money every month.
Yeah. And I love the fact that you explain that because I remember when I was trying to get my head around a lot of all this stuff, tax wrappers and all these kind of confusing words. What's a tax wrapper? What does that mean?
Yeah. So, I mean, so a pension is like an ISA. There are others as well. You might come across something called a general investment account or an investment bond. These are all tax wrappers. And what differentiates them is tax, hence the name, and access. So I'm of the view that probably 95% of people in the UK, all they need is an ISA and a pension.
Okay.
Plus a bank account, right? Obviously, to live day to day. So the only things that you really need is to build wealth for the future. And I'm going to exclude property because that's kind of a thing on its own. But in terms of financial kind of accounts, all you need is a pension and an ISA. So what differentiates them? A pension, you get tax benefits putting money in. They grow tax-free. So while the money's in there, you don't pay any tax on any growth or income that it produces. But when you take money out, when you retire, there is some tax to pay.
Okay.
Right? So tax benefit going in, tax-free while it grows, some tax to pay on the way out.
Okay.
An ISA is different. You don't get any tax benefit putting money in.
Yeah.
It grows tax-free, and it's completely tax-free when you take money out. So they're kind of two sides of the same coin. But the reason that pensions are so powerful is because of the tax breaks going in. And if you're an employee, you're getting more free money from your employer, which just accelerates the growth on the things. Exactly. That's why they're so powerful. For anybody older than me, they may have what are called defined benefit pensions, where there is no pot of money as such. What you get is a promise of a future income. And the only person responsible for honouring that promise is the company. So there's no risk to you, the pension holder. It's the company that sponsors the scheme. And because of that, most of those schemes have closed down now. The only people really who have defined benefit schemes are if you're working in the public sector. So if you're a nurse, a doctor, fireman, policeman, or whatever, then you may have a defined benefit scheme. But for most of us now, it's a pot of money, and very often quite a few pots of money, because we might have one if we move from job to job. Something we need to talk about. Quite a lot of us will have 2 or 3 pensions, or maybe even more. My record for a client coming in was 14.
What?
14 different pension pots, right?
That's possible, right? If you're
you change jobs,
jobs
right,
like every year or something like that.
That's right. So but really at its root, that's all it is. It's just a savings pot.
And thank you for like breaking that down, and in terms of the different like tax breaks and how powerful it is, and the fact that, like you say, you do get that. You do get the benefits in terms of like with workers. And I do want to actually talk about that in a little bit, because I think it's very important. Like I said, I never really took advantage of that essentially free money.
It is,
right? One thing I wanted to ask you actually, and I also love the fact that you mentioned how people see pensions, because sometimes when people mention pensions to me, they kind of think how do I put it? They think it's a thing where it's the investment. They see it in pensions as the investment, if you get what I mean. So they see pension as if it's like the S&P 500.
Okay.
Do you get what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, I do.
That's what they see it as, like, oh yeah, my money, my pension's growing, right? So how does money in a pension grow? Because I don't think a lot of people have an understanding of how does this rise in, how would a pension pot, despite me putting money in it, how would it be worth more in the future?
That's the right question. So if a pension is just like I called it a box earlier on, right? It's a wrapper, it's an account, if you like. The thing that makes you money is what's inside it, right? So if it's a box, it's what's inside the box. And with a pension, that can be lots of things. But most of us will have a fund or funds which are invested in something. So, your friend who might talk about the S&P 500, where you could buy an S&P 500 fund and have that inside your pension, and that would grow over time. And you could have a FTSE 100 fund, you could have Tesla shares, you could have anything in there. In certain pensions, you could have a commercial property. So the office that my company works out of, I own inside my pension. All right. So one would hope that the office will increase in value over time and it'll pay me rent over time. All of that goes into my pension, which you remember is tax free.
Yeah.
So, if you think about what investing is swapping your cash for assets which grow, produce an income, or ideally both. So you might buy shares. Well, you hopefully buy shares and the companies do well and the share value goes up. Maybe the shares produce a dividend, an income, right? Both. I own an office building in my pension. I hope the value of it will go up and it will pay me a rent, an income. So I'm getting both. So that's how money grows. You don't sort of stick pound notes in your pension and leave them in there, or you don't have a bank account inside your pension where you're not going to get any growth. You've got to buy something which will go up in value. And the great thing is that it goes up in value without any tax implications inside a pension. And you get extra money given to you when you put money in, which is the best bit.
Thank you, because that makes it so clear for people to understand. Because I do think a lot of people think, oh, it's just money that's going in there. And the money, oh, I've put in, I don't know, 100,000 and that's what I get at the end of the year. Instead of actually what you're doing is you're investing money, wanting it to grow over time, and then you're then able to draw on that money in the future. Right. I think it's important for people to know, because essentially what you're saying is that those people you're kind of an investor in a way without knowing that you're an investor.
Most people are investors without knowing it. Because they're automatically enrolled into their pension at work.
Exactly.
But I mean, they probably never give it a moment's thought after that. They see it go out of their payslip every month. But actually, that's a properly powerful tool that they've got in their hands. And so they just need to grab hold of it and understand a little bit about it to make the most of it. But most of us are investors without even knowing it.
And thank you so much for explaining the income and the growth and the fact that you're swapping, because inflation's a problem, right? And we'll talk a little bit about that a little bit later, why that's a problem and how, again, it might be an issue for more of us than we may know. Imagine you had an employee who showed up to work daily, but they did absolutely nothing. You wouldn't be happy with that, right? Well, that's what happens when your business funds sit idle in a regular current account. Isn't it time to make money work for you? For us business owners, expenses like rent, taxes, payroll never stop, and they keep going up. Yet so many of us leave our business savings in accounts that earn little to no interest, missing out on potentially hundreds of pounds in passive income that could really help cover those costs. That's why I use Tide's instant savings account, which allows me to passively earn 3.81% AER Variable on my business savings. The best part, I can withdraw funds instantly with no fees, and my business savings is protected with FSCS protection on up to £85,000. We've partnered with Tide for this episode, and they're giving new members a special bonus. When you sign up and use my code SavvyWalletQ1, you'll get a £100 bonus when you open and fund the Tide Instant Savings account with £5,000 within the first 30 days. Setting up a Tide Instant Savings account is quick and easy with just 4 simple steps. To take advantage of this special offer, tap the link in the episode description and don't forget to use my code SavvyWalletQ1 to claim your £100 bonus. Boosted offer valid until the 1st of June 2025 for new customers only. Rate correct as of the 6th of February 2025. Visit tide.code/savings for up-to-date rates and key terms during the promotion and afterwards. So obviously we talked about some of the pros of, pension, so the fact that it was, there's tax benefits and stuff like that. What are some of the drawbacks, would you say, to pensions?
Probably the biggest drawback is access. How old are you, Atto?
I'm not saying on camera.
Okay.
I think people will guess. I'm in my 30s.
Okay,
I don't think I've ever said that.
Well,
I'm in my 30s.
Okay, you're in your 30s. That's all right. We'll leave it to that. I'm sorry to put you on the spot.
No, that's all right.
But you are not going to be able to access your pension until you're 58 at the earliest.
Yeah.
So that's the obvious downside.
Well, let's hope that, because it keeps on changing. I don't know anymore. That's
why I said at the earliest. So, I mean, when I started doing my job, women can access their pension at 50 and it's 55 and then it's gone up. So it's currently, for me, my state pension age is 57. As we record this in 2025, you can access your pension from age 55. Okay. But after 2028, that's going to go up. and inevitably it will continue to go up. It's going to get aligned with the state pension minus 10 years. So my state pension is 67, which means I can access my personal pension at 57, right? That's the biggest downside, right? Because if you're in your 30s, that's a long time. But that's both a downside and an upside, because if you can't access it, it means you can't spend it on something frivolous in the short term, right? I wrote the book on frivolous spending, right? I'm a sucker for it. So it's quite good that a lot of my money is tucked away and I can't spend it on stuff that I don't need. But also it's a benefit because compounding works best over time. But ultimately, you put 100 quid in your pension today, man, you can kiss it goodbye for well over 20 years in your case. So whether you want to call that a downside or an upside, but it's an important thing for people to know. So you ought, you know, I mean, God forbid, man, but we don't know how long we've got, any of us, right? As I get older, I'm even more aware of this, but we should always prioritize today. But really, all we're doing in a pension or stocks and shares ISA or whatever is we're putting money aside so we can spend it tomorrow. We still get the benefit. It's just down the line. And I think if we think about it like that, you think, okay, all I'm doing is I'm just socking money away for my future, and I'm going to really enjoy it one day. As long as you're not kind of living like a monk in the present, right? Because you might never get there. So you should enjoy today as well. That's kind of my beef with the whole FIRE movement. I mean, I think it's done wonders. I think it's a good thing fundamentally. But those who really go for it and they're like, okay, I'm going to like just live like a monk now, and I'm not going to spend anything. I'm going to save 70% of my income. You know, live in my mum and dad's basement until I'm 40, but then I can retire. It's like, cool, but if you're dead at 42, that sucks, right? Right? And it might happen. I've seen it happen, man. I've seen people work like dogs to get to retirement and then die within 6 months. And I'm a big believer in living for today. It's a fine balance. We got to do both, right? You've got to enjoy today and save for tomorrow. Sorry, that was a little bit of a diversion there, but I think this is really important.
This is important.
It's so very important. The downside is it's tucked away, but the great thing is that you get to enjoy it later, hopefully.
Thank you so much for talking about that, because I think it just shows the importance of, yes, a pension is important, but at the same time, don't deprive yourself for it. Because like you say, we hope that everybody's there and they enjoy their pension. That's what we would always want. But it's like you say, does that mean you should live a poor quality of life because you're... You know?
No. You know, the longer I do my job and the longer I live, the more unimportant I realize money is. It's necessary, but it is not worth pursuing for its own sake. It's only worth amassing and understanding to the extent that it enables you to live a great life. And so, you know, I always worry. I would never, for example, take on a client who tells me that they just want to make as much money as possible, because they're not going to be very nice people. Right. Whereas I'm happy all day long to work with people who say, look, I want to kind of build this pot because I really want to help my kids get on the property ladder, or I want to have amazing holidays in 5 years' time when I retire. I want to take my wife around the world or my husband around the world. So, you know, it's life, right? And it's kind of qualitative stuff. It's what makes life great, and money can enable that, and it can also disable that if we get it wrong or we don't have enough. So that's why we do this stuff, to live well.
Exactly. I completely agree with you. And I wanted to clarify something. So we mentioned stocks and shares, right? ISAs. Are you able to share what's the difference between that and pension, just to clear that out for people so they understand?
The primary thing is access. You can get a stocks and shares ISA any time. So, and whereas when you put money into a pension, you get what's called tax relief, which essentially is, instead of paying money to the revenue, to HMRC, you get to put it into your pension instead, right? So instead of it going to the government, it goes to you, which is a win, right? You don't get any of that with an ISA. You put 100 quid in an ISA, 100 quid goes in, right? You put 100 quid in a pension, 125 pounds goes in, right? Free money. It's not really, it's tax, but it's, you know, that's the key benefit, the key difference really. Tax relief going in with a pension, you don't get that on an ISA, but you can get an ISA out when you want, and you can't with a pension.
That's the beauty of the ISAs, right?
Yeah, right. That's why you should have both.
That's true. Yeah, that is the reason, because it gives you a bit more flexibility if you're able to. It's like, I haven't really figured out how, in terms of how I'll use my ISAs versus my pensions, but I think it's a nice thing for people to think about.
Yeah,
right.
It's nice to have options.
Exactly. It's nice to have options because your pension, of course, we know, like you say, it's something that we potentially 50s, 60s. But if you are looking to retire earlier, maybe your stocks and shares ISA is for the earlier period. That will tide you over to.
Yeah, I have that conversation quite a lot. You know, for people maybe who perhaps they have a company scheme, one of those old DB schemes that I mentioned, and they can't access that till they're 65, say. If they want to retire at 60, they would need another kind of pension to draw from. But if they want to retire at 50 and they can't touch their pensions at all, they're going to need money in ISAs and other stuff, right? Yeah. So, yeah, flexibility is important.
Yeah.
And everybody's goals are different, right? I have no intention of stopping work ever, so I think I'll probably always earn some kind of income, but it'd be nice not to have to.
That's the thing, not have to.
Work because you
want
to.
Yeah, and do how you want to, but do you mean you got the money, right? It's always important. So in terms of putting money into a pension, how much roughly can somebody put in before there's potentially tax implications?
Okay, so the simple answer to that is you can put in £60,000 per year.
Okay, that's a lot.
100% of your salary, whichever is lower. So if you're earning 25,000 quid a year, the maximum you could put into a pension is 25,000. If you're earning 125,000, the maximum you could put in is 60. So that's the ultimate ceiling. Now it is a bit more complicated than that. So you won't be surprised to know because it's personal finance and nothing's
always complicated.
When we're talking about how much we put into a pension, that is a gross figure. So again, let's just make it simple, right? So if you want to pay into a pension out of your bank account, that's money you've already been taxed on, you've earned it, and it's coming to your bank account. So you can put £80 in to a pension, and the pension company will go to HMRC and say, send us 20 quid. And what you're getting is the tax you've already paid back, and it's just getting directed into your pension. Works slightly different if you pay into a pension through your pay slip, because most of us, it goes into the pension before we get taxed. But ultimately, right, instead of, if you're a basic rate taxpayer, you're paying 20% tax. So if you earn 100 quid, you're going to pay 20 quid to the revenue. But instead of that, it goes into your pension. So it all goes to you.
Yeah.
You just can't touch it for a bit, right? So, I mean, that's a key benefit. Why would you give it to the government if you can give it to yourself, right? And so but there are the 60,000 limit is the maximum you can put into a pension and get that tax relief. Theoretically, you could put more than that in and you wouldn't get any tax breaks for it. But good luck finding a provider that will allow you to do that. Right?
That allow you to put more
in than it's called your annual allowance, the pension annual allowance. I've yet to find a provider who will let you do it. I'm more than happy to be corrected if anybody wants to write in and let me know. But I've never found a provider that will let you put more in than your annual allowance. You can even go back 3 years. So if you haven't fully used your allowance for the 3 previous tax years to this one, you can go back and use that allowance as long as you've got enough salary headroom in this year to do it. So the ultimate limit is your salary in the year that you're making the payment, right? Or 60 grand, right? But it's so as ever, there's always nuance and complication. But I mean, how many people put 60 grand a year into their pension? Not a lot, right? So for most of us, the annual allowance is never an issue. And so I would encourage people not to worry about that. Just put what you can in. But when we join an auto-enrollment scheme, which is the kind of automatic joining of the scheme when we get a job, the minimum is that we put in 5% as the employee, right? But one of those 5% is actually the tax that we would have paid. So technically we're only putting 4 in. The revenue's putting 1 in. And then the employer's minimum is 3. So if you work that out, I'm actually only paying 4%. The revenue's putting 1% in. And the employer's putting 3. That means that my money's doubling. Because I'm only putting in 4, but actually 8% is going in. There is nowhere else on the planet where you can double your money overnight, except maybe Vegas. But that's a bit more of a risk, right? And that's why pensions, particularly workplace pensions, are so powerful. You're probably going to ask me about some numbers in a minute. I'm going to show you just why that doubling of your money in a workplace pension is so powerful.
It is so powerful,
unbelievable.
But and it's not something that is, again, shared widely. It's not something that we talk more about the fact of actually taking advantage of that. I remember there's so many companies that I've either looked at like in terms of offering, like you go to apply for jobs and they're like, oh, we match, and I used to skim over it, like it's not important. But those things are so important because it's essentially they are giving you free money because
on top
if they're
of your salary,
giving you,
yes,
exactly, right. So it means in a way you can kind of think of it in two ways, right? You can effectively, maybe the salary's not as high, but maybe they're willing to match more. So actually, if they're willing to match more, you don't need to put as much in either.
Potentially.
Right? That's how you have to think of it as well.
Yeah, I mean, in an ideal world, you put in as much as you can. Exactly. And you put in all the way up to the, whatever your employer will match, you would put that much in, but you got to eat, right? So you might not be able to do that. But yeah, it's only going to accelerate things further, isn't it? If you've got an employer who will match more than the minimum, that's valuable, definitely. It would definitely be a factor in taking a job.
You know that moment when you've just wrapped up a huge project, you're ready to celebrate a big payday, and then that sinking feeling hits you as you remember you need to create an invoice from scratch just to get paid. Here's the thing though, creating and sending out invoices shouldn't be painful, which is why I decided to use Invoice Home. They make invoicing effortless so you can get paid faster. With Invoice Home, you can create professional invoices in minutes, choose from hundreds of invoice template designs, and personalize them with your business logo. Once your invoice is ready, download a PDF, copy, or send it directly to your client via email. For even faster payment, add a payment link to your invoices, allowing your clients to pay conveniently by card or PayPal. Now, if you happen to be traveling or away from your laptop, you can still create and access all of your invoices on your phone through the Invoice Home mobile app, keeping your business ticking along no matter where you are. The best part about Invoice Home is that they offer over 100 invoice template options for you to choose from for free, so you can try it out with no strings attached and see if it works for you. This episode is brought to you by Invoice Home, so if you're interested in trying out any of their free invoice templates, I've added a link in the description of this episode for you. So you mentioned state pension, so we sort of went through that a little bit. You've now mentioned, workplace pension. How does that differ to like self-invested personal pensions? Which is SIPP.
SIPP, SIPP. Most people call them SIPPs, SIPP. Self-invested personal pension. Well, back when I started in this job 20 odd years ago, right, nobody had SIPPs because they were the preserve of wealthy people, like properly wealthy people. And you paid a ton of money in fees for them. But what makes a SIPP different from a pension that like most of us would have is you can do slightly more interesting investments in them. So you can hold direct shares. So you couldn't hold Tesla shares in like your bog standard, maybe Standard Life or Aviva Scottish Widows pension that you've got at work or Nest, right? You couldn't hold Tesla shares or MicroStrategy or whatever floats your boat, right? You couldn't own shares in a single company, whereas in a SIPP you can. Anybody who's interested in investing will have heard of something called an ETF. It's a kind of fund, but technically it works like a share. So you couldn't hold an ETF in an ordinary box standard pension. You'd need a SIPP for that. Most people have SIPPs these days. That's what they're after. They're after individual shares or ETFs investing. But also I have a SIPP because I own a property in it. You can't own a property in an ordinary pension. Right,
yeah, because I was confused. When you said you hold a property in a pension, I was like,
commercial property. You can't hold residential property in a pension, unfortunately. Okay. I remember them being sort of rumours of that like 15 years ago, but it never came to pass. Okay. But yeah, literally the office building where not the whole building, right? Literally just the bit that we work out of, I own inside my pension. Okay. It's just a tax efficient way of buying stuff.
Interesting. So, so with a SIPP, you're able to, you have a bit more flexibility in terms of what more choice in terms of what you can kind of choose and invest into. Yeah. That is so interesting. I never knew that about SIPP.
Most people won't need that, though. Yeah. Most people, that's true. For most people, an ordinary pension will do just fine. Yeah. The biggest issue that most people have, I think, again, this comes down to lack of education and why would anybody know any better, is that most people join their workplace pension and there is always a default scheme, a fund inside it, right? Yeah. So and it's usually a fairly sort of balanced, which means roughly half of it, maybe 60% will be in shares, the other half, 40% will be in bonds. Yeah. And it's designed to be kind of middle of the road, vanilla, right? But if you're like 25 and you're not going to be able to touch this pension until you're 58 at least, you don't need to be in a safe investment. You need to be in an aggressive investment, shall we say. I shouldn't use the word safe, really. You don't want to be in a dull, boring, vanilla investment. You want to be in something that's going to really grow. Yeah. And for that, you need shares, global equities. Yeah. Right? We can go into that if you want. But usually the default fund is not not fit for purpose. So really the first thing that people should do when they join a workplace pension is look at the available funds and choose a better one.
Yeah. Let's stay on that. Why is the workplace pensions actually, why should people continue to use it and actually maybe pay a bit more attention to them?
Yeah. I mean, the short answer to that is employer contributions. It's that extra 3% that you're going to get from your boss. It's that extra free money.
Yeah.
I mean, nobody turns down free money, and it is literally free, right?
Yeah.
So that's the reason why we need to take it seriously. And also, because we pay into it automatically, it just kind of happens through our payroll. We never see that money, right? It don't land in our bank account and we pay it in. It gets taken out, and what we get is what's left, right? And so it's a powerful kind of automation towards our future wealth, right? So we need to take it seriously. But remember, pension is just a savings vehicle. It's just a kind of an account. The thing that's really important is what's inside it, and that's the bit that we neglect.
Yeah.
So we neglect both putting in, when we could be putting in more, perhaps, if we're able to, and we neglect the thing that's the underlying investment. And it's so easy to get that right, because in most pensions, certainly most workplace pensions, there's like a handful of options.
Yeah.
So, for instance, many people listening to this and watching this will be in the Nest pension. That's the kind of sort of government approved kind of, I always call it like the Tesco value. It's bog standard. It's all right. It's perfectly fit for purpose, but it's fairly bog standard. Well, if you're under 27, they put your money automatically into a cash fund. So it's not even invested. Why? Because they say, well, we want to kind of encourage engagement with pensions. So what we don't want is a young pension investor getting freaked out because the market falls and they see the value of their pension drop. Your average 25-year-old never looks at the value of their pension. But the average 25-year-old's got 30 odd years before they touch that money. So keeping it safe is madness.
Yeah.
It should
cash
be
as well.
In cash, right? It's just, you're losing money to inflation. So it's that, I really sort of object to that kind of nanny state, trying to sort of wrap people up in cotton wool, whereas what we really need to understand is what makes us money in the long term is investing in the great companies of the world, usually through funds inside a pension.
Yeah, exactly. And I completely agree. I think putting something in cash for 30 years, and we know inflation is 2%, some years it might be more. You might have devalued. And a lot of people, this is kind of scary, but many people may not know any better. Oh, my money's in pension, I'm going to have a certain pot. Get to the end of it and it's been in cash and it's been valued by half or whatever it is. Yeah. It's scary.
One of my other bugbears with workplace pension is that very often by default there's something called lifestyling turned on. Lifestyling is a problem at the other end. It's as you approach retirement, and what it's designed to do is to reduce the risk of your investments inside your pension the closer you get to retirement, which sounds like it makes sense. But it is a kind of carryover from when people used to get to retirement and they would have their pension pot of money, and the only thing they could do with it is buy something called an annuity. And an annuity is simply you hand over your pension pot to an insurance company and they give you a guaranteed income for life. So obviously the size of that income is dependent on how big your pot is. Yeah. So what you don't want is a stock market crash 6 months before you retire and you see your pot drop by 10% or 20%. And so this sort of making it more safe the nearer you got to retirement made sense then. But these days, the vast majority of people keep their pension invested and they just draw off it. Yeah. So it's like a bucket of water with a tap on it. So the water is the funds invested, it's the money, and you turn the tap on and you just draw it out. And so probably somebody who's, say, 60, who starts drawing off their pension, that money's got to last them another 30 years probably, because they're probably going to live to 90, right? Yeah. And so it's madness to make it safer at 60 when it needs to be invested for another 30 years.
Right, I get it, yeah.
So, but nobody knows that. Most people don't know that, but it's a real bugbear of mine. So you don't need to worry about it in your 20s and 30s. But I've had people come to me, didn't know they were in it, and in 2022, when bonds, which are traditionally safer investment, just tanked, they lost a quarter of their pension value. Almost like, not quite overnight, but over the course of 6 months before they came to us, I hasten to add. But they looked at the statement a year ago and it's like 600 grand, and they look at it like a year later and it's 480. And they're just like, man, why?
It's painful.
And they had no idea.
That's so painful.
Education again, right? Yeah. So, I mean, that's like for the far end, that's as you're approaching retirement. But you want to, at least 10 years before you plan to retire, you want to make sure that's turned off.
Yeah.
But
gosh.
why would you know about that unless you know about it?
Yeah, I mean, you wouldn't. And look, a lot of this stuff talking about the default stuff. Let's stay on the default because I think it's quite important for people to understand that. And because when you go into your workplace pension, they're going to enroll you into a default. How can people kind of understand? Okay, obviously, I know it's all based on different ages, but let's assume that they're far away from retirement, they've got another 34 years.
Yeah, right.
How can they kind of understand if the default works for them or not?
Yeah, I think it's quite simple for people. The default won't work.
Yeah.
because it will be too safe.
Yeah, okay, cool.
Look, investing is about making your money grow over time so that you can spend it later. Yeah. Because money loses value over time. That's inflation, right? So if you've got 100 quid, it's going to buy you a lot less in 30 years' time than it will now, right? And that's why we need money to grow. We need it to beat inflation. So the default fund won't do the job because it will be too safe. It'll be too steady. The way you beat inflation is to invest in the great companies of the world. That's how I like to describe it, right? So if you invest in global equities, it's just another name for shares, you're buying shares in all the companies you use every day, Microsoft, Apple, Google, pharmaceutical companies, travel companies, oil and gas and all that sort of stuff, energy companies. You're buying this stuff, and because you're a consumer, I'm just absolutely a believer that human beings are really good at buying and selling stuff off each other. And that's really all we've done as humans for thousands of years. And if you're investing in the great companies of the world, as these, the actual companies involved will change. These days, it's all the tech companies. 30 years ago, it was petrol companies and healthcare. And it'll change again. It'll be AI, NVIDIA and all this sort of stuff. It's all driven by AI. There's always something. So the constituent companies will change. But if you're a global equity index investor, so you're just buying all the companies in the world, you're always going to be a part of that. Yeah. And we know from history that will beat inflation. So really, if you're in your 30s, you need to find inside your pension 100% global equity fund. Yeah. It's as simple as that. There's no need to go any deeper, I don't think. Okay. Really, you just want a global equity fund. You want it as cheap as possible, right? Because costs are another thing that are a drag on your performance. But workplace pensions are usually pretty cheap. So you really don't have to worry about that. Yeah. So it's quite simple. So what I mean, right at the start, we said people just need to do a few simple things. And really, if you're the right side of, say, 50, you should have a global equity tracker fund inside your pension, and there will be one. Yeah. Which is definitely possible for me. I'm invested in a global tracker on both actually stocks and shares ISA and on the pension side. I just did it on, but I've got 2 pension pots, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So I've got 2 pension pots, and on both of them it's global. It's just easy. Yeah. But one of the things that I came across, because a lot of when you do search for funds, you can filter and say global. The other thing was there were so many. So then I was like, okay, let me order it in terms of fees. Which ones was the lowest fee? And I kind of just went for one of the lowest fee ones. And that was it, set and forget. And I've not looked at it since. You won't go wrong with that. Yeah. Really, what else do you need? Yeah. You kind of, I suppose, if the world's your oyster and you can choose from any fund, which if you're opening a pension with a platform like Hargreaves or Interactive Investor, you've got a lot more choice, but your workplace pension is going to be a lot more limited than that. Right? So it makes your choosing a lot easier. But you did exactly the right thing, Atto. You want global equities and you want as low cost as possible. Really, these are the things that are inside your control. Yeah. You can control how you're invested, and you can control how much you pay in fees and tax. The rest of it, you've got no control over. We've got no control over what Trump says, what central banks decide to do, or what Putin does in Ukraine, or what's happening in the Middle East, or what AI is going to change in the next 5 or 10 years. No control over that whatsoever. But you need to grab hold of the levers that you can control, which are costs, tax, and spread of assets, how you're invested. But you did everything right. What you did is exactly what I tell anybody to do. Okay. Global equities, keep your costs as low as possible. Wow. Job done. Okay. It's that simple. Seriously. Great. So let me add a complication to this, as I normally love to do on the podcast. So for the younger people, that makes sense. You've got a bit of time to grow it, right? Let's say, again, 30 odd years. But for the people let's say they're approaching retirement, let's say they're a few years out, 5 to
1 year out, or they're nearly there. It's next year.
Yeah.
How can one's approach change? Do you think about going into cash at that point? Or
Well, no, it wouldn't be quite as simple as that. I think this is the reason I have a job as a financial planner, right? And that's most people who come to a financial planner like me are in the run up to retirement.
Yeah.
Because up to then, it's fairly easy. It's like put as much as you can in, pensions and ISAs, global equities, keep your costs low. Go and do it, right? But then you start to think, okay, I'm now approaching the point where I'm going to have to start taking money out. How's that going to work? How can I do that most tax efficiently? If I've got pension here, ISA here, maybe some other pot, maybe I've got a rental property, how do I most tax efficiently take my money out? And that's basically what I do for a living. Now, it's not to say that people can't do this for themselves. I absolutely believe they can. The more complicated things are, the more valuable somebody like me becomes, because we can do it all for you and tidy it up and simplify. But the answer to your question really is you need to start planning. What money am I going to need and when? So am I going to stop work altogether, or am I just going to maybe do 3 days a week for a couple of years and kind of ease into retirement? What impact will that have on my day-to-day income? Am I going to have a shortfall now, of what's coming in over what's going out? Where's the best place for me to get that from? And so we have a structure that we would do for clients, and I teach this in my academy, so people can do this for themselves, where we essentially ladder. We call it a cash flow ladder. So money you're going to need in the next couple of years should be risk-free. It should be in cash, all right? Money you're going to need in the next, say, 3 to 5 years. As far as you can see this stuff, there's always surprises, right? But money that you're going to need in the next 3 to 5 years or so should be invested, but fairly cautiously, maybe a notch down from how you might automatically be sort of comfortable investing. Money you're going to need 5 to 10 years out from now should be invested like normal, like it always has been. Anything you're not going to spend for 11 years or more, just go all out and be an equity investor, right? So everybody's different. Everybody's timescales are different. And if you've got different sources of money coming in at different times, maybe you've got a couple of old company pensions, maybe, you're sort of 3 years older than your partner. And so you might have state pensions kicking in at different times. Usually for most people, retirement is a transition rather than an event. Yeah. And so you can plan it a year at a time, because everything, man, whether you're saving and investing for the future or whether you're spending in retirement, everything comes down to cash flow, money in and money out. And so you just need to plan it a bit better, because you might have to draw from different sources at different times. And then you'll get it right, and then the budget will happen, and they'll change the tax rules or whatever, and you have to rethink it. But this is seriously why I have a job, because a lot of people just don't even want to think about it. They say, please sort it out for me. And we do all right doing that, but it keeps us on our toes. But every client's different, and that's why we enjoy it.
Okay. That makes complete sense. So it sounds like, of course, and I appreciate the fact that you said it's not just a point in time, like, okay, you retired, okay, now it's completely stopped. That's it. I'm never working again. It's like transitional phases, which is why it's important to have these conversations, also understand, right? Like how much you potentially going to have in the future, potentially what's your plan, like you say, to start drawing out from that future, but also make sure you're not drawing, like you say, the whole, open the tap wide, the water, and then the whole water comes
you're doing
out,
it all to run out. And suddenly you're state
right?
pension only, and you're struggling. I think disastrous. I think the whole concept of retirement is changing, and I think it's good. It needs to. So, classically, you work with the same company for 45 years, you retire at 65 with a carriage clock or a watch and a handshake from the boss, and then you'd probably be dead within 5 years, probably. Right? 50 years ago, that's how it used to be. People retiring now, the sort of boomer generation, they've done very well with house prices, but generally speaking, they've done very well at saving and investing, and markets have gone up. They are still, many of them, doing the traditional hard stop. They retire and that's it. They're working one day, they're not the next. I think that's quite dangerous. I've seen too many people, as I mentioned earlier, work too hard and then they stop and it kills them. I mean, sometimes literally. But so much of our identity is wrapped up in what we do for a living. It's almost like a grief thing when you lose that. Particularly as you approach retirement, very often you're at the top of your field, right? And to suddenly, stop, that is quite a big deal. But I see changes already. I see people shifting career completely and doing 10 years, say from 60 to 70, but doing like 3 days a week. And it's totally stress-free. You know, they might have been a CEO or a senior manager or something, and now they're stacking shelves at Sainsbury's a couple of days a week. But they're having a whale of time chatting to the customers and their colleagues, bringing in a bit of money, so they're less dependent on dipping into their pots. I'm also seeing, I think we're going to see a lot more, a kind of people doing a succession of mini retirements throughout life. Because you don't have to wait till you're in your 60s, right? You could say, actually, I'm going to whack a load of money in stocks and shares ISA and take a year off and travel. Right? Why not? You do that in your 40s if you want to. I've got several clients who've done that. Not least because they get their, they have children, and when the kids are in the sort of tween age, sort of 9, 10, 11, 12, they take them off for 6 months and take them out of school, and they go. One particular family I'm thinking of, a Vietnamese family, and the kids are raised in the UK, never seen Vietnam. So the parents took them and they met all the family, and so cool. But they saved for that. And it's kind of like a mini retirement. They took a year off, right? 6 months in Vietnam, and your life is yours to design how you want. And if you understand and can kind of manipulate the financial system in your favor, then you can do whatever you want with it. So let's not all just aim for the same kind of pattern, right? And decide what we want to do. I meant what I said earlier, that I never see myself stopping working because I love what I do. It'll probably change and I'll probably do less of it. My wife will probably tell me I'll have to stop eventually. But I mean, we get loads of time together now, and I love what I do, and it energizes me. It doesn't tire me out. I realize I'm fortunate, right? Not everybody's in that situation. So why would I stop? Because society says that I'm getting on a bit.
I guess it's because maybe, like you say, you're absolutely right that retirement needs to change, because actually maybe people want to retire because they don't like what they do.
Well, yeah, right.
Right?
Yeah.
That's what you're retiring from something you don't like to do, because at the end of the day, right, okay, granted, some people might want to not do anything, which is nice. Fine. That's great. If you want to do that, that's your life. But I think for the vast majority of us, we want to do something. So maybe actually it's trying to find the something that you enjoy, and it maybe gives you that retirement. Think of it that way.
Yeah, I think if we're stuck doing something we absolutely hate, something is wrong. I don't ever want to be flippant. I know it's really hard, and people can feel trapped. But could you go all in and save a load of money and go to evening classes and retrain, or take 6 months out and retrain? I'd say at least one email a week from somebody who's considering getting into the financial planning profession, and they're doing something completely different. They're like a middle manager in an engineering company or something. And I always try and make time to have calls with them, but they're saying, I'm saying, look, you're probably going to take a pay cut, right? If you're on 75 grand a year now and you're going to be going into a brand new industry, you might halve your income. Can you do that? And they say, well, actually, not yet, but if I work and save really hard for a couple of years, I might be able to do that. And so, well, that's your answer. Money equals freedom. So if we are able to get ourselves in a position, I mean, sell all the crap in your loft, right? All the stuff that you don't need anymore. You can put some money together, which will give you freedom. I don't ever want to be, it's just easy, just do it. I'm very aware that I've had many advantages, in my life, and a lot of people don't have those advantages. But I think we can all, to some degree at least, improve our situation and give ourselves some freedom. And I want to say that it's probably never been easier in terms of the opportunity the internet provides, particularly.
Definitely. It provides so much opportunity. There's a lot that we can be doing, and I think it's like about finding your calling, but also remember it's not easy. It's got to be a lot of hard work. Like we both discussed. The fact that you've done 550 podcasts, that's hard work.
It's a lot of work,
It's a lot of work, which I admire that. So I wanted to use an example for people to understand like how pensions can kind of grow. So I had an example here, right? Okay. And I think it'll be good to help them visualize it. So I've given an example for a 35-year-old person with a 30k pension pot. Let's say they want to retire roughly at 65 with an income of 37,000. The income of 37,000, that's based on the average currently now.
Okay.
I know in the future it's going to be way higher, but that's just just figures.
We need to think in today's terms.
Yeah. And they have no mortgage, so I'm assuming they have no mortgage or no debts, basically. I just wanted to make it a very straightforward scenario. How much would they need to contribute monthly over the next 30 years to
get there? That's a good example, actually. Yeah. The maths gets tricky because of inflation, and that's why you were right to say, you know, that's today's figures. The only money we understand is today's money, right? So, for instance, if we take a 37,000 a year income and we assume 3% inflation for 30 years, that's 90 grand.
Oh my God.
Right? So £37,000 of income becomes 90,000 quid. In other words, £90,000 is going to buy you the same amount of stuff as 37 grand does today in 30 years' time. That's a big number.
That's a big number.
But it's a big number because it sounds big to us today. That's way above the average wage. But the point of inflation is that will be the average wage in 30 years' time, right? It sounds like a big number to us because we can only think in today's terms. So maths is complicated when we're factoring in inflation. But let's think about this. Now, you said 65. I'm going to play a little bit fast and loose because that's not too far off state pension age. Now, I'm going to assume that this person's going to get their full state pension. Now, plenty of people listening and watching to this will be railing at me saying that state pension will be means tested. It won't have a state pension by the time, in 30 years' time.
Yeah, that's what a lot of people think.
I actually don't buy that, but let's assume we've got to work with what we know. So we're going to assume that of the 37 grand that this person wants to have as income, 12 grand of that is coming from the state pension, right? Which means we're left with, 25,000. Yeah, 37 minus 12. To check my mental arithmetic then for a minute. Okay, so factoring that up for inflation, that means we need to find £60,000 in future money per year, right? Now, the 4% rule, come across the 4% rule, which is like a rule of thumb that says if you've got a pot and you can draw 4% off it, and if that's enough to meet your needs, you'll probably be okay. So to work that back, if we need 60,000 quid a year after our state pension in 30 years' time, working that up means you need a pot of 1.5 million quid.
That's a huge amount.
This is when people turn off, right?
Yeah.
And they're just like, well, okay, that's never going to happen.
Yeah.
Right, bear with me.
Yeah.
So if you're starting with 30 grand in today's money, remember that's 1.5 million quid down the line. It's a long way. If you're starting with 30 grand saved, we need to assume a return on our investment. How much are our investments going to grow? So I'm going to be fairly conservative and say 6%. Okay. So if we're starting with a 30 grand pot and we assume a 6% return over 30 years, you would need to save, say it quickly, £1,362 a month. More people turning off. It's a lot of money, right?
A lot, yes.
Right?
That's a lot.
That's assuming a 6% return. If we assume an 8% return, you only need to save £850 a month. But that's a big difference. We've gone from £1,362 down to 850 quid a month.
Okay.
But can you see that if you are saving into a pension, you only need to save half that because you're getting the tax relief and you're getting your employer's contribution. Now, if you're self-employed, it sucks, right? Because nobody's paying in for you. It's all on you, right? That's both the downside and the benefit of being self-employed. You don't answer to anybody, but you've got nobody paying into your pension. But now we're talking 425 quid a month, which starts to sound a little bit more realistic. Now, plenty of people listening to this will go, no, it isn't. But plenty of people will be able to maybe scrape that together. But even if they don't start there, maybe if they start 100 quid a month and say, right, I know where I need to get to. Now, if you start lower, you're going to need to get a bit higher than 425. But you might say, look, but if in 10 years' time I can get to 600 quid a month, that'll probably be okay.
Yeah.
The problem with kind of projecting forward like that is the numbers get so big that people just think, well, what's the point?
Yeah.
But you must understand that anything you can do today, which is more than you're doing already, is going to improve your future financial position. And future you is going to be mad as hell if you decide to do nothing now, right? Because you think the numbers are too big. Whereas future you will thank you profusely if they're better off in the future because of a decision you made now.
Yeah.
So the maths is tricky. Inflation messes everything up.
Yeah, it does.
Right? The short answer, Atto, is as much as you can. Live for today, put as much as you can away so that you can live tomorrow as well.
Yeah.
Ultimately, that's it.
Yeah.
Right?
Thank you for taking us through the numbers because I think it's important for people to understand. But also, I don't want people to feel worried or scared about that. We're going to talk about that as well, because I think there is a few fears from people, but I don't want people to feel worried about, the 1.5 mil and stuff like that. No. Yes, it can sound big, but it's only big because it's 30 years away. If we think in 30 years time, it's not that big in 30 years time, right? Realistically, because 30 years is a long time. If we're talking about compounding, right, and you're doing that every month, and like you say, if your salary is also going up over time, maybe bonuses you're putting into that as well. There's a lot of ways of things that you can kind of do. So
there is real magic in small but regular increments. Yeah. So if you can start at 50 quid a month today, it'll be a problem if you're still paying 50 quid a month in 5 years' time. But if you can start at 50 quid a month today and you set up like a reminder in your calendar in, say, 4 to 6 months' time and say, can I make it 60? Right? 10 quid a month extra. Yeah, I can do that. I'm not even going to feel that. And then you do the same 3 or 6 months after that and you make it 75. Before you know it, you're paying potentially a couple hundred quid in. But you started at 50. You started at a number that felt like you could cope with it. And instead of going straight in at 200 quid a month, which would be painful potentially, you've just built up to it. But you have to be intentional to do that, right? Otherwise, 10 years' time, you're still paying 50 quid a month because that's what the direct debit is. Yeah. And you never change it. You've got to be intentional with this stuff and say, if I want to improve my future situation, I got to make a decision to get better at this every few months. And just put a bit more in. You won't even feel it. Yeah. Tenner, man. Yeah. It's like less than 2 pints.
Exactly.
Right. So, we can do that.
We can. So I wanted to reverse the question now, right? I don't know if I've figured this out. I'm still trying to figure it out, but I was playing with calculators yesterday, right? Figuring out how much you need. How do people go about figuring that out? Because that aspect is the part where it's like, okay, do I need 2? Do I need 3? No, actually, not even that. Because the calculator can help you, but it's more, how much do I need per year in terms of income, right? I think that can be challenging for people to understand. Like,
it is. And it's no wonder, again, because we're looking in the future, we've also got to factor in tax. Yeah. Right? And you're just like, man, I can't even begin to get my head around what the tax situation might be in 30 years' time and what inflation will have done to the numbers, right? So try not to worry too much about that. That becomes clearer the nearer you get. And so I'm able to be quite precise with my clients who are 5 years away from retirement. Yeah. But if they're 30 years from retirement, it's very woolly, very vague and sort of, fuzzy, shall we say. So in terms of how much you're going to need, there's all kinds of rules of thumb. And we need to understand that we may have other sources of actual income, like the state pension. If you're lucky enough to have a final salary scheme, if you're a nurse or whatever, a teacher, then, you may have an actual income as well. So if you think about it, we only need to kind of bridge the gap between our guaranteed income sources and what we want to spend. So if we've got a state pension and, I don't know, maybe we inherit a flat or something, there's a bit of rental income coming in. We start with our lifestyle. You use 37 grand a year, right? We start with that. We take off our guaranteed sources of income and we're left with a shortfall. Let's just say that's 2,000 quid a month, 24 grand a year. The easiest kind of rule of thumb is the 4% rule. Multiply that by 25 and you'll end up with a pot of money that you would kind of need. Okay. But I mean, you could probably get away with 25% less than that. Okay. You just don't know what your spending is going to be. Yeah, I honestly,
that's the thing.
I wouldn't lose any sleep over it, man. You do what you can. And the planning gets easier the closer you get. Obviously, you don't want to sort of leave it too late. Right. Yeah. And so you've got to think, look, I need to take this seriously and put as much as I can in while still living fully today. But that'll all become clearer later on. I just think it's a bit of an unnecessary use of brain power.
Yeah. So don't worry too much. Put what you can.
You'll be all right.
And then obviously see where it is. Obviously do a few calculations. See roughly what you could have. Yes. But don't worry too much because obviously you can't do more than you can. But make sure that you are obviously contributing to your pension. If there's employer match, take advantage of it. And then make sure that your money is not in 100% cash.
No, exactly right. Yeah. Do these little increments over time. Make sure you're invested properly. Absolutely. These things will be okay. And as you take more of an interest in it, you'll get better at that sort of thinking about it and sort of planning it all. But it'll all get clearer the nearer you get. Just do as much as you can.
Yeah. So we talked a little bit about tax, right, as well, right? So we talked about how people can reduce tax through, obviously workplace pensions in a way. How can people do it if you're, like, let's say you're self-employed, right?
Yeah, okay.
How does that potentially work on that
If
side?
Good question. If you're actually self-employed, then let's just say you earn 40,000 quid. Let's say you're a plumber, right? And you earn 40,000 quid. You bill 40,000 quid worth of plumbing jobs. And if you're self-employed, you can offset a whole lot of things against your income so that you pay less income tax. So you can, if you might have a van that you lease, you might buy tools. You obviously are buying materials and stuff like that. You take one off the other and you're left with your profit. Well, your profit is your income as far as the taxman's concerned. So you just, assuming you don't need it all to live, then you put some of it in a pension. And instead of paying tax on that 1,000 quid that you put into your pension, the tax is going into your pension, into your pot as well. So that's one way you can do it. I mean, really, in terms of investments, there are others that you can do which you can immediately save income tax. But they are the realms of, they're very high risk. They are generally for people who have already maxed their pensions and their ISAs. Okay. So we're talking, the two that spring to mind are called enterprise investment schemes and venture capital trusts. They're both high risk investments in small companies. You can lose it all, but there's real tax benefits. Yeah. But I mean, probably 1 in 1,000 people does those at most, right? And you generally don't buy them as a consumer. You generally buy them through an advisor. Not always. You can go direct, but that's the deep end of the pool, man. That's not for most people. Yeah. So the pensions are still the best, most tax efficient way of saving. And so if you're self-employed, you're going to have to work harder because nobody's paying in for you. Yeah. Right. That's the thing. I would say if you're self-employed, try to save 5% of your income off the bat. Okay. And try and get it to 10%. Nice. It's hard, but it's a good rule of thumb. Okay. But the sooner you start, the better. And if you can't start at 5%, start at 2.5% and commit to getting to 5% within a year or 2 years. Amazing.
And then obviously for, people who are self-employed, just in case they're wondering, right, to set up their own pension, they will be looking at SIPP, right? That's what they would, probably. That's what they'll sell themselves.
Any one of the platforms. So the major ones in this, the biggest one in this country by far is Hargreaves Lansdown. It's not the cheapest, but it's a brilliant platform. The app is superb, easy to use, tons of fun choice, interactive investor. Any one of these, you can open a pension in about 90 seconds. Dead easy. Wow. It's easy to open a bank account sometimes.
That's
particularly if you've not got an employer paying it. So just pick one, they'll be fine. And as you get into it, and more interested in it, as you see the numbers grow, then you start to think, actually, is this the best one? And then you start listening to you or me or, reading about it, and you think, actually, there's maybe a better platform over here. I'm going to shift my money to that. Yeah. And it's never been easier to do that. So don't sweat the detail. Just open a pension, start paying into it. You can deal with the rest later.
I love that. Thank you so much. You're literally putting us at ease. Good. I also want to put people at unease. I'm going to ask my next question, right? That's why I say this, right? Because I just want to inspire a bit of action with people, because I think is important. I wish, like I say, for me, I put money in my pension early and did things. So question, why is it important for people to put money in as early as possible and not delay it and wait? You know what? Let me wait until I get 70, 80k salary, and that's when I'll start. Yeah, but now actually, no, I won't.
The simplest answer to that is because compounding takes time. So the earlier you start, the better. I can't remember the exact figure, but it's something daft like 95% of Warren Buffett's wealth he made after the age of 70. Or something like that. Yeah. The guy's been investing since he was 20 years old, right? So he's undoubtedly the greatest investor that's ever lived, probably certainly the greatest living investor. And yet the vast majority of his wealth came towards the end. Compounding takes time. It's not a straight line. It's an exponential curve. So it starts low. It's like hockey sticks up and it really gets sharp, right? So the sooner you start, you get a jump on that. And the sooner you'll see the benefits, right? So, I mean, that's reason enough, because you'll have more when you come to the point where you want to spend it.
Exactly.
Right? That's ultimately what it's about.
Yeah.
We want to live well throughout life. What we don't want to do is run out or not have enough.
Yeah.
Or just as we get to the point where we can't work anymore because we don't have the health or strength to do it, and we realize we haven't got enough to enjoy the life that we've lived up to then. And what do I do now? Maybe I have to, downsize my house or equity release. There are things you can do, but how much better to have provided for that ahead of time if you can.
Exactly. And I just really wanted you to highlight that, because I think it's so important. To the earlier you start, you can take, you can take a benefit. You can get a benefit of compounding, right? Which is important at the end of the day, right? Like, I think, again, like I say, I didn't take it that seriously. Now I know, I understand, I take it seriously. Okay, cool. I can take, advantage of that. And it's really important, especially if you can have your money compounding for 30, 35 years. You don't have to think about contributing crazy amounts because you've got a long time, right? Rather than, okay, wow, I've only got 10, 15 years. I really need to bust a gut to get to
which means you can enjoy those middle-aged years a bit more.
You've
already done a lot of hard work. I would say to anybody sort of watching this, like, don't beat yourself up for past decisions, right? We all are where we are. We've all done tons of stuff wrong. And again, we don't teach this stuff in school. So I don't know how anybody's supposed to make good financial decisions unless they're lucky enough to have like a parent or mentor that helps them with this stuff. So don't beat yourself up over past decisions. Just say, right, it's like that. It's a terrible cliche, but it's like, when's the best time to plant an oak tree? Well, it's 100 years ago. When's the second best time to plant an oak tree? Well, it's today, isn't it? Right? So it's the same with saving for your future. It doesn't matter what's gone before. Just resolve to do better going forward. Learn about this stuff. It's easier than it's ever been to learn. There's so much choice and great content. Don't be suckered in by the garbage on the internet that tells you everything's about Bitcoin and get rich quick schemes. If anything sounds too good to be true, it is. That's a golden rule, and it's been true for centuries. But just learn about this stuff. Read books, listen to podcasts, watch videos, get better at it one day at a time. Your future self will be very glad you did.
I completely agree. Talking about future versus now, a lot of the watchers and listeners have goals, right? And to be fair, I've got this question: how do I balance? You mentioned it, the balance, living for now versus the future. So people have other goals, like they want to save for a house, deposit, maybe holiday, other things, right? How does somebody balance that a goal like that, let's say saving for deposit for a house versus investing in a pension? You might
expect somebody like me to say, well, retirement's the most important thing, you need to prioritize your pension. I would never in a million years say that, right? Today is always the most important day of your life. It's the only one you're guaranteed to get, right? So you got to enjoy it fully today. Now, in terms of practically the answer to that question, so, if you're in the workplace pension, that's kind of happening anyway. If it's your sort of medium-term priority to buy a house, I wouldn't overpay into a pension. I would just do the normal amount and make sure I'm saving into a lifetime ISA. Lifetime ISA, special kind of ISA. You can put up to £4,000 a year in it, and whatever you put in, the government will add 25% bonus. So if you put the full £4,000 into it, it gets made up to £5,000, right? The downside of that is you can only use that money for buying your first home. That home's got to be less than 450,000. I'm pretty sure that's right. And check my numbers. Or you can touch that money after age 60. Right, so you can use it as a kind of proxy pension, but most people use a lifetime ISA for buying a home. If you take money out for any other reason, you got to give 25% of it as a penalty back to the government, right? So it's quite important that, because you're not just giving them the bonus back. So if you put 4,000 quid in, you get £1,000 bonus, and then the next day you decide you want to take it out to buy a car. Well, you're giving up 25% of 5,000 quid, which is 1,250. So you end up with less than you put in, right? So you got to be careful, right? But if I would just be saying, look, pay what you want and what you pay the normal amount into a pension and prioritize your near-term goal of buying a house. Right? Most of us have kind of very short-term goals, like saving for Christmas, going on holiday next year, right? We have kind of medium-term goals, which might be move house, buy a house for the first time. And then we have the ultimate kind of long-term thing, which is retirement. I would always shift the priority towards the shorter term, the nearer term.
Okay.
It's just obvious that to me.
That.
Isn't that common sense though? I think it is.
I think it should be.
It should be, but most people overcomplicate it in their mind. So just your pension's going to be all right. You're paying into it, right? Once you've bought your house and maybe you've had your kids. I mean, I'm paying a ton of money into my pension because I've had my kids. I've bought my house, nearly paid off my mortgage, right? And so I can pay a lot more into pension, but I couldn't when I was 25.
Yeah.
So take your life stage where you're at and make the best of it, but always prioritize the nearer term.
That's so important. That's so important. You know what? I just remembered something, right? I can't remember the exact scenario, but it was the scenario that saddened me, right? And actually, you might have a lot of people that kind of go through this. So I had somebody comment, I can't remember, and if they're listening, I think they'll remember the comment. I can't remember the exact figures, but they were saying something to the effect of, they put money, they've got money in their pension. Their pension provider made more money than they did. I think they made like £3 and they said their pension provider, I think, quote me if I'm wrong, this person, I think like 1,000.
Maybe.
Something like that. That's crazy. How can people kind of maybe, let's say, minimize that happening to them instead of prevent? Because I think it's, maybe you've come across people that go through that kind of situation. And
the only scenario I can see that would be the case is that there was a drop in the value of the underlying investments inside the pension. So they only made like £3 or, maybe even went backwards. Sometimes you get your pension statement, it's worth less than it was last year and you've been putting money in. That sucks, right? Yeah. But of course, the pension company's taking their fees the whole time, right? You've got to consider anything like that over the long term. Stock markets fall 1 year in 4. It should never be a surprise when stock markets fall. That's what they do, right? But they relentlessly march upwards given enough time. So if you look at any sort of graph of a stock market return, it goes up and to the right, man. You will make money in the stock markets. But if you look at a very narrow portion of it, you've got a 1 in 4 chance of losing money, right? So nobody would probably take a 1 in 4 bet of losing money or, losing money with their life savings if that's all it was. But over like more than 20 years, you've got almost 0 chance of losing money because it makes money over time. It just does, always has. So I imagine what that person experienced was a bad year in markets. Okay. So they didn't see their pot go up very much, but they saw the charges go out no matter what, because the pension company will have their money. How do you fix it? Pay the pension company as little as possible. So if it's a workplace scheme, you'll have no control over the charges. But workplace schemes generally are very low cost. You're probably paying 0.3% a year, something like that. If it's a SIPP on a platform, you may be paying about the same, maybe 0.4, but you'll be paying for the fund as well on top. So you want to keep both of those as low as possible. Okay. So look for a low-cost platform, low-cost fund, or a platform that caps your fees. Sometimes you get a percentage-based fee, but you don't pay any more than, like Vanguard, for example, is I think 375 per year. So that's the maximum you'll pay them. That's all right.
Yeah, that's not bad.
Particularly on bigger pots, right?
It's lower than 1,000.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah. So it's a lever in your control. Keep your costs low. And don't judge that over a small time window, because that's just what markets do. That is the only scenario out of that I think that could have happened.
Yeah, it was interesting when they said that. I was like, oh, that's sad. That's a shame, right? And I was like, oh, but
what if that person said, well, pensions are a waste of time? Then aren't they? I'm never going to save any money into a pension. Clearly
that's what they were probably thinking.
And that would be catastrophic. But at the risk of annoying that person, that is an education problem. They need to understand more about how it works, and that's why we do what we do.
Yeah. Talking about that, so I don't forget, pots, right? I mentioned I've got 2 different pension pots, right? I guess does it make sense? You said you had somebody at 14. Does it make sense to combine it all, or is it okay for people to have them?
There's rarely any reason to have more than one pension.
Okay.
Some people have 2 because, they've got like their current workplace scheme. And maybe they've got pensions from previous jobs, and all they do is they combine all those into one personal plan. And then when they move on from the job that they're currently in, they'll drop that pension into their personal pot. So the most anybody ought to have is 2, right? There's no sense in having 14. That's the first thing we did. These days, it's not so much the case with some older plans. So if you were in a pension, say, prior to 1990, sometimes there are special benefits. They're called safeguarded rights, which might mean you might be better off leaving money there. Okay. So one of the things I always teach is, if you are considering moving money out of a pension, you write or ring the provider and say, are there any safeguarded rights attached to this pension? If the answer is yes, you need to get advice. Because some of those old pensions, you could take out all of it as tax-free cash, right? That's very rare, but you could, or enhanced tax-free cash, maybe 30 or 40 or 50% of it is tax-free cash, or guaranteed annuity rates, guaranteed incomes at retirement. You don't want to throw that away without knowing what you're giving up.
Okay.
So, but that is rare. And folks listening to this, man, probably not going to have that.
Yeah.
Because if you had a pension prior to age 1990, well, you're at least my age.
Okay.
Right. So you would probably know if you had any of those. I think. So for most of us today, we don't need to worry about it.
Okay. Cool. Thank you. Thanks for answering that. But so it sounds like really we should be trying to combine as much as possible. Yeah. Where we need, and then maximum 2. I've got 2, and I'm even thinking. The more I'm thinking, the only reason I have 2, just to explain it, right, it's just because I'm taking advantage of the fee being low on one. But then I'm like, actually, like maybe I should just combine it, because if it's a bigger part, then compounding is gonna have a bigger impact than maybe that lower fee, maybe potentially.
But potentially. I mean, it's like, I think the main reason I think it's worth combining is that people are less likely to engage with their finances if there is friction to them doing that. Yeah. So if you want to sit down and say, where am I actually at today? You know, where is everything? How am I doing? If you've got to get figures from 5 different pension companies, there's a very good chance you're just going to go, well, do you know what? I can't be asked. I'm just going to put Netflix on instead. Whereas if you've got one app on your phone and you log it in and say, all right, okay, that's my pension. That's a lot easier. So simplicity improves engagement with your finances. So I'm a big believer in keeping it as simple as possible. There's no reason to have more than one pension, at most 2, and no reason to have more than one ISA, I don't think. Yeah,
might consider it then. Honestly, I've been all right, should I just transfer it? I don't need the 2. I don't need 2 apps. I don't need to log into 2 apps. Okay, so might go a bit more doom and gloom here, but hopefully not too much. So I was reading some research, right? So according to research from Phoenix Insight, it was stating that the UK is less than 2 decades away from a pension crisis.
Okay.
I guess that's their research.
Yeah.
I can't really comment on that. This research showed that 3 in 5 defined contribution pension savers will enter retirement with savings below an adequate level in the early 2040s. So defined contribution pension savers, like people who have like potentially like workplace
with a pot,
right?
Yeah, exactly.
Essentially, is that right? I guess my question is, what can people do to ensure that they're not the people that might be hit by this supposedly pension crisis in the future? Have enough money.
Everything that we've talked about. Yeah. Honestly, I think we've kind of laid the groundwork for that. I think they might call it a pension crisis, but honestly, I think it will be the product of a lack of education while the economy has shifted from a defined benefit pension world to defined contribution pension world. Yeah. So, like my parents' generation, they're in their sort of 70s and 80s now. A lot of them had defined benefit pensions. So they knew what they were going to get in retirement. They had no risk at all, right? And their property went up massively in value, right? Mortgage rates were very low for a lot of that as well. Going forward, probably mortgage rates and interest rates will stay at more normal rates, kind of where they are-ish now, maybe down a bit. We don't know, though. And there's certainly defined benefit pensions are not coming back. So we've kind of transitioned away from a much more guaranteed world to a world where all the risk is now on the individual rather than on the government and on the companies, the employers. And we've done that without actually telling anybody. All right. So I'd say it's an education crisis, but it's going to be manifested in a financial pension crisis, potentially. It's not definite, but you and I do what we do to try and bridge this gap, right? Yeah. And I guess I would say everything that we've talked about, really making the most of tax relief and pensions, investing aggressively in global equities, switching out your default fund. These are the things that you do, making those small regular increments. This is how you don't have to worry about like the economy and the population at large. You just have to worry about yourself and your family. So do what you can with your situation. Start a side hustle if you can. Again, we said that earlier on. In many ways, it's easier than ever. You can start a side hustle and put half of that money into a pension. It's money you never had before. Yeah. You still get to enjoy half of it, but half is going away for the future. You're not going to be subject to a pension crisis because you've been putting money away. Exactly. So do what you can for yourself. Everything we've talked about, and be careful what you read.
Yeah.
Don't let the news is always negative, right? And you can let it kind of hold you back. What's the point? The world's going to hell in a handcart anyway, so what's the point? Don't ever be fatalistic. I'm a relentless optimist about the future. I think humans are really cool, and we do great things, and we build great stuff, and we're good at building wealth. Yeah. But it's down to us as individuals.
Yeah, I completely agree. You know, when you were talking about the fact that a transition from the defined benefit, I think what other people kind of know it as is like final salary, right? That's like the term final. You get your final salary as pension. It's so interesting. When you said that, I was like, oh, actually, I didn't think of it that way. You're absolutely right. The fact that it's gone from the final salary, defined benefit, to actually you are having to contribute. You're taking on the risk. You're having to, essentially, it's almost like you need to be in a know-how to build your own pension pot, but you haven't been told that you need to be the whole know-how. So this thing might be looming and you don't even know that is looming on you. That's right. It's so interesting.
It is, and it's really important. The reason why we use the terms defined benefit and defined contribution. Defined benefit, those are, final salary is kind of a subset of defined benefit. There are other kinds, but defined benefit, the clue's in the name. It's the benefit at the end is what's known. It's that's defined. Where the money comes from, you don't have to worry about. That's for the company to worry about. They've guaranteed you an income one day, and they've told you how much it's going to be. It's defined. Whereas in the modern world, it's defined. The only thing that's defined is the contribution, how much goes in. You've no idea how well it's going to do. You don't know what it's going to mean when you get to retirement age because you don't know what inflation's going to do. So all the risk is on you, and we've transitioned to that world without equipping people.
Yeah. Well, hopefully in this conversation we're equipping people.
A little bit.
This is what we're trying
to do. Every little helps,
right?
man. Yeah, for sure.
Definitely. Okay, so the other thing that I wanted to ask you, right? So again, doing more research, right? A lot of this stuff was just looking at the data. I was like, God, we need to really focus on our pension. So there was research commissioned by the Living Wage Foundation. So it found that the average pension pot needed to meet basic needs increased by 60%, right? Yeah. Between 2020 21 to 2023, 24, right? So for me, I'm thinking, obviously, we have all these rising costs. We know inflation's happening, the future's uncertain, AI and stuff like that, right? And obviously, we talked about the value of the pound and potentially state pension, right? We're not sure if it'll be here. I guess, what other options should people consider, I guess, aside from, obviously, we're contributing to our pension, but is there anything other options that people can consider?
It's a good question, Atto. That sort of stat that it's got, the average pension pot needed to meet basic needs increased by 60% between 2020 and 2021. It wasn't even a lot,
by the way. It wasn't a lot. What it went up to is 110,000, what it said. And I was looking at it, it's like a lot.
Yeah, well, it's not enough to meet most people's basic needs, right?
I know.
But that period that it's gone up over 2020 to roughly 2023, 24 has been a very unusual period. It's all been about cost of living crisis, right? And double-digit inflation we had in 2022 and 23. Yeah. We haven't had that since the 1970s, right? So it's not normal, that. Inflation is, we call it the silent killer. It is a really powerful negative force against your future wealth. But people do need to understand that the last few years have been weird, out of the ordinary. You would not expect that to be the new normal. There's no reason why it should be. Headline inflation is already coming down. It's come down a long way from where it was. But really, everybody has their own inflation rate, right? So we use the inflation figures by the government. That's really only part of the story. So again, I would honestly, you could just stick your head in the sand when you read stuff like that and think, well, I'm just not going to do anything. But your question is, what other options should people consider? There is still, to my mind, there's no better and more tax efficient way to build wealth than in a pension because of all the stuff we've talked about. There are other vehicles that you can invest in. I mentioned them very briefly. Enterprise investment schemes and venture capital trusts where you get really good tax benefits, but the price is very high risk. I mean, high risk of total loss, right? So that's not for most people. Yeah. I think really the only two assets that will make money over time are what my good friend Andy Hart calls businesses and bricks, shares and property. So I think property is still a really important asset class. Maybe tells you something that I don't own any investment property myself other than the office block. I don't own rental properties, houses, only because I'm a lazy person. So I don't want to be a landlord, right?
Yeah.
But I think property is an important asset class. And a lot of us buy too much house. We buy a bigger house than we need. Or we, particularly when we get to retirement and the kids have flown the nest, it's like, I really don't need to be sitting in a 4 or 5 bedroom house. So maybe I could unlock some of that money by selling it and downsizing. Maybe. It's just an option. So wealth building is about businesses and bricks, shares, equities, and property, I think, primarily. Other than that, man, there's no magic bullet. You know, I'm convinced of the fact that crypto will be a part of our lives going forward. I don't think it's a passing fad, but I don't think it's an investment yet. It's still a bet, right? As it becomes more mainstream, it's getting there, Bitcoin particularly, but as it becomes more mainstream, then it's something we'll have to take greater notice of, but it's only an asset class. And I don't think it's the answer to everybody's prayers. Elon isn't the savior, right? Neither is Donald Trump. So there's not really much. If there was a magic bullet,
those are still good options, though.
Well, yeah, they are.
Shares and property.
If there was a magic bullet, everybody'd do it.
Yeah,
right?
that's true. Yeah.
So I think everything that we've talked about really is the answer. I mean, I've built a career on this, man, and everybody that I know, and they're not all retired, who is wealthy, has done this. In my whole career, I've only ever worked with 2 lottery winners. Most of them are self-made.
Really?
Most of them have not inherited. They've built money slowly over time by doing all the stuff we've talked about.
Okay. And obviously consistently contributing as much as they can and, you know, again, live within their means, but, you know, like you say, balancing right now and the future, which is a great message. I think it's very important for people to understand that balance is, you know, required as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you. Really appreciate this conversation. It's been very helpful. One thing I wanted to ask you, and I think this is very important for people to understand, long-term thinking, right? Thinking more 5 to 10 years, 15 to 20 years, obviously still thinking for now, still comfortable with now, but also being comfortable with putting money aside for, you know, the future. Are there any, like, I guess, mindset strategies that people can kind of use to kind of help them with the long-term thinking a little bit?
Yeah, like hypnosis or something like that. No, I mean, there's no sort of quick fix I can give you. I think if we think about investing, what we're doing is we are growing our money so we can spend it later. So all we're doing is deferring spending.
Yeah.
There's only really 3 uses of money. One is spending now. One is investing so we can spend it later. And the other is giving it away, which is, you know, most of us get to that point later in life. We do what we can.
Yeah.
But I spend a lot of time helping clients give their money away to their family and to causes that they care about. But, you know, the priority is that we use it to live now. Second priority is that we use it to live in the future. And it's your money. You're going to be spending it. It's just a bit down the line. And believe me, man, as I approach my 50th birthday, time goes quick, right? And so it'll be a year. You'll be spending it before you know it. So just think of it as, you know, stick it in an envelope so you can spend it down the line. The envelope's just called a pension. Yeah. There's no... I mean, I'd love to give people fancy mind tricks, but there isn't any. You've kind of just eventually got to get to the point where, look, I know I've got to do this, and so I need to do it. I think about that every time I eat a chocolate bar, right? I think I know I need to do this. I need to get better at this. And I should probably start now. But, you know, there's no shortcut, man. You've just got to do it.
Okay, amazing.
But you'll be glad you did.
Yeah, you will. I don't think you can ever say, oh, my God, like, I've got too much money. Like, you're not going to say that to yourself. You're going to be, I'm happy I've got this. I can take a year off and do whatever I want to do, right? Okay, so the final question I want to ask you around pensions is, of course, changes potentially from the budget. I didn't see anything that would impact me right now.
Nope.
But I think there is some, maybe I do have a few listeners that, you know, maybe potentially could impact, but yeah, I want to hear from you. What were there any kind of budget changes that impacts pensions specifically?
Yeah, the biggest one by far was since 2015, pensions have been outside of your estate when it comes to calculating inheritance tax.
Yeah.
So inheritance tax, as the name suggests, is only payable when you die. Everybody gets a limit. There's actually 2 bits to the limit. It doesn't really matter. But over that limit, you pay 40% to the government before your beneficiaries get it.
Yeah.
And prior to the budget, pensions were not included in that calculation. So I got loads of clients who are using their pensions as inheritance vehicles. So literally, they're not spending their pensions. They're investing very aggressively so that it grows quickly. And they're doing it for their kids, right? Because they've got money they can spend elsewhere. Well, as of April 2027, announced in the budget, pensions are going to fall into people's estate. And it's even worse than that because your estate will pay 40% on it. So let's just say round figures. Let's say you have an inheritance tax problem, so you're going to pay tax on all your pension. Nice round figures. If you've got 100,000 quid, you're going to pay 40,000 quid of it to the government from the off. Then the remaining 60,000 quid will be treated as income in your beneficiary's hands. So if they are higher rate taxpayers, they're going to pay another 40% on what's left. So that is 6, 12, 20, another 24,000 quid gone, right? So now your 100 grand has become 40 and 24, 64, it's become 36,000 quid. And it could be worse than that. If you're an additional rate, if you are in Scotland, you're going to pay more tax than that. The worst I've seen, the highest tax rate potentially is 91%.
Gosh, you must have had angry clients.
Yeah, not angry with me.
No, not angry.
Properly
Just
angry with
ranting,
Rachel Reeves. Yeah, right.
Oh, man, it's painful.
And there's not a whole lot you can do about it. It's not in yet. So assuming you don't want to die before April 2027.
Let's not accelerate
that. No, exactly. Yeah. It's not worth that, right? We don't let the tax tail wag the dog. But that's a huge change for a lot of my clients.
Yeah.
And you should never knee-jerk reaction to anything. But a lot more people will be taking money out of their pensions more regularly and giving it away, we say, with warm hands rather than cold hands. They'll give it away in their lifetime. Because there's beneficial reasons to do that as well. So that's the biggest change. It doesn't affect you if you're still building wealth, probably, and it certainly doesn't affect you if you don't have an inheritance tax problem already. Yeah. But that's the big one. That's going to keep me busy for a couple of years with clients.
Yeah, definitely. Wow, that's so interesting. And this is such a shame.
That's what they pay me for. The thing that annoys me most about it is that pensions are a political football. They are continually being messed around with by politicians. Yeah. Because it feels like a step removed. It's not your bank account, right? It's your pension. It's kind of over there. It's for the future. And so it's an easy hit for the Chancellor. But the problem is you can't plan then, or at least you're having to change your plan. So I changed everything in 2015 for clients when the rules changed back. Prior to that, it was in your estate, right? And now it's back in your estate. It's like, just leave. Stop moving the goalposts. Yeah. So Rachel, if you're listening, stop messing with my pensions, man.
Oh man, yeah. I don't like the fact that it's political move because it's kind of playing with people's futures a little bit, right? Yeah. That's your future, that's your plan. You do not want to have an uncertain retirement. You're planning your best. You know there's already so many external factors, how the economy is going to be going, inflation, all that other stuff. Now you don't need to know am I going to be paying more tax on my pension and stuff like that. Really don't need that, right?
You can only plan for the regime that we know.
Yeah.
So I've had loads of clients come and say, what should I do? In fact, I had loads of clients before the budget because there were so many rumours. What should we do? The answer is nothing. We don't know yet. We don't know what the changes are going to be, if there are going to be any. Turns out there was. And so now we turn our minds to planning in the new regime.
Yeah.
That's why people pay me. But it's not worth knee-jerk reaction. Just take your time and think it through and say, what are the implications of this? Do I need to change anything as a result? It'll be a relatively small proportion of the population, but a lot bigger than it should be.
Okay. Gosh. So your book, let's talk a bit about your book. What should people expect from it and how do you want it to impact their lives?
So this is kind of the follow-on to the first one. So the first book, which came out in 2018, the Meaningful Money Handbook, was really, I wanted to write the one book that anybody could read and would be able to take control of their finances. So that covered everything from budgeting to debt elimination to the basics of insurance and how important it is to insure your life and your income and stuff like that. And then the fundamentals of saving and investing, pensions, ISAs, all that stuff, basically everything up until retirement. And so there was obviously sort of to be continued at the bottom of it, right? So I finally got round to writing the follow-up. And so this now says, starting from kind of maybe 5 to 10 years out, the 3 stages of retirement. So we've got, I call the home straight. So you're heading towards retirement. Then the great transition, which is usually a period of time, whereas we get used to being retired. And then, of course, there's later life stuff as well, where we might need to start thinking about care, slowing down a little bit, giving money to our family, inheritance tax planning, and then obviously what happens after, right? So I wanted to kind of just deal with that whole later life stage, really, retirement. And I teach people how to do what we do every day for clients. So how to make sure everything's in the right place as you get towards retirement, so you haven't got bits all over the place, everything's tidy. And then how everything should be invested properly, the kind of laddering that I was talking about, where you have near-term money safe and longer-term money invested aggressively. Show them how to build that, and there's examples in the book. And it's really to help people not have to see people like me.
Not have to.
Well, it's like,
not have to see you. Fair enough. Like self-help, right?
Well, exactly. I've built a career on telling people they don't need to see a professional advisor.
Fair enough.
I'm busier than ever, so go figure, right? But the book is designed to help anybody design and execute their ideal retirement.
That's what I appreciate about you, Pete, because you put out so much, like over 1,000 pieces of content, and you're still so busy. But it also shows you really care about this stuff, and you've given out so much free stuff. You continue to give out so much free stuff, and like you've provided so much great information on this. So I really appreciate it. I definitely want to check out your book because especially with the pension stuff, I'm really interested, like how I can potentially, when I get obviously closer, how I can change the strategy. Because that's, for me, I'm a planner and I like to plan that kind of stuff. So interesting. Where can people find you if they want to reach out to you?
Well, everything I do is under the name Meaningful Money. So if you just search Meaningful Money, you'll find me. Meaningfulmoney.tv is the website, but search me on YouTube and in any podcast app, you'll find Meaningful Money, and there's a ton of content there. As you say, it's been 15 years of my life, man, but I love it more today than I did at the outset because of all, every day I get people write to me and say, look, 18 months ago I had 25 grand worth of credit card debt, but now I'm debt free and I'm saving into my pension and I've got insurance so my kids are protected. And I just that's why I do it, right? So I love doing it. I don't ever plan to stop. So check it out, and I hope it's helpful for people.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Pete. Like I said, really appreciate you. Thank you so much for sharing all the wisdom around, retirement, planning for your future, living for today. I think it's very important. I think it's a very important message because we don't often hear that. We don't often hear, actually, enjoy your life now, right? Yes, do that stuff that will come. Don't ignore it, contribute to it, but don't do it at the point where it's like having a detriment to your life. And I think that's very, very, very important. So thank you so much for that and sharing all your wisdom and insights, especially with like your clients as well. Do you have any final words for watchers and listeners?
Look, man, thank you for having me. Likewise, you're doing great work. The more voices of, different voices as well, different cultures, different ages, different genders. There's never been a greater need for this stuff. Money's not important, but in the grand scheme of things, but we have to deal with it. So keep doing what you're doing. Thank you for having me, and hope it's been helpful.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks so much, Pete. Really appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of podcast, and see you next week's episode.